Breaking, 2 hours ago, a serving senior intelligence officer walked out of the Joint Intelligence Committee's secure headquarters in Whitehall, handed a package of classified documents to a waiting legal representative, and triggered the most explosive domestic political detonation Britain has seen in a generation. What those documents contain about Labour's secret domestic monitoring program, a program targeting the private medical records, financial transactions, and personal communications of ordinary British citizens, has already caused Health Secretary Wes Streeting to resign from cabinet in a statement so raw and so furious that it has left Downing Street with no coherent answer, no functioning communications strategy. And a Prime Minister who has been described by 3 separate cabinet sources in the past 90 minutes as completely unreachable. The intelligence officer whose identity is being protected under whistleblower provisions and whose legal team has filed emergency injunction applications in 2 separate courts this morning spent 11 years inside Britain's domestic intelligence architecture. He held top-secret security clearance. He attended joint ministerial briefings. He sat in rooms where decisions were made about what the British state was permitted to know about its own citizens. And this morning at 9:52 a.m., he decided that what he had been watching for the past 19 months could no longer continue without someone saying, clearly and on the record, and with documents, that it was happening. His legal representative, human rights barrister Charlotte Blake Casey, read his prepared statement on the steps of the Royal Courts of Justice to a gathering of journalists that had swelled to over 60 within 20 minutes of the first social media posts about the document transfer. The statement was measured, precise, and utterly devastating. It said, "I have served this country with complete loyalty throughout my career in intelligence. That loyalty is to the British people and to the constitutional principles that define the limits of state power over individual citizens. I am releasing these documents because the program they describe, designated Operation Hearthstone, violates every one of those principles. It is not counterterrorism. It is not national security. It is the systematic monitoring of ordinary British people who have done nothing except live their lives in ways the government has decided are inconvenient to its interests." The documents number 217 pages. They have been reviewed overnight by 3 independent legal experts retained by the whistleblower's legal team, a former Home Office permanent secretary who agreed to assess their authenticity on condition of anonymity, and the legal affairs editors of 2 national newspapers who were given controlled access under embargo conditions that expired at 10 a.m. All 5 assessments reached the same conclusion. The documents are genuine. Operation Hearthstone is real. And its scope is something no British government has ever attempted in peacetime. Here is what Operation Hearthstone actually does. It does not intercept communications in the conventional sense understood by the Investigatory Powers Act, the legal framework Parliament passed to define and limit surveillance powers. It operates in the gaps that framework left, the spaces between legislation that were never expected to be exploited by a domestic government against its own population. The program aggregates data across 14 separate government databases: NHS patient records, HMRC financial histories, universal credit case files, DVLA records, council tax payment histories, library borrowing records in local authorities connected to the program, and social prescribing referral notes made by NHS community health workers in 13 pilot areas. It combines this data with commercially purchased information from 3 data brokers operating under contracts classified as sensitive procurement, meaning they were not subject to normal parliamentary scrutiny, to build what internal documents describe as behavioral confidence profiles of targeted individuals. These profiles are not built on suspicion of criminality. They are not built on intelligence leads indicating terrorist activity or serious organized crime. The targeting criteria set out in a classified annex to the program's operational framework and reproduced in the leaked documents identifies individuals for profiling based on factors that include attendance at political meetings, membership of trade unions, participation in community organizing activities, contact with journalists or campaigning organizations, and what the document describes as demonstrated propensity for coordinated public dissent. In plain language, if you went to a meeting, if you joined a union, if you spoke to a reporter, if you signed a petition more than twice in a 12-month period, you were eligible for profiling under Operation Hearthstone. The number of active profiles in the system at the time the whistleblower accessed the database stands at 412,000, not suspects, not persons of interest in any legal sense. 412,000 ordinary British people whose NHS records, tax histories, financial situations, and daily movements have been assembled into secret government files because they showed what their own government categorized as a propensity to organize. Among those whose profiles have been identified in the leaked documents is Frank Whitmore, a 69-year-old retired steel worker from Sheffield who has attended his local Labour Party branch meetings every month for 31 years, not meetings organized against Labour, meetings of the Labour Party itself. His profile includes his diabetes medication history from his NHS records, his pension payment schedule from HMRC, and a note from a social prescribing worker he saw twice for loneliness support after his wife died, describing him as emotionally isolated but civically engaged. That note, made in confidence in a health context, is in his government profile. Standing outside his terraced house this morning, the printed document in his hand shaking slightly, he said, "She was trying to help me. I told her about my wife, about the meetings, about keeping myself busy, and they put it in a file." He stopped, looked at the document again. What kind of country does this? Sandra Obi, a 55-year-old NHS nurse from Birmingham, appears on the list because she was a union representative during the junior doctors' dispute and was recorded attending 4 meetings with strike organizers. Her profile contains her full employment record, her mortgage payment history, and the details of a mental health referral she made for a patient, a referral that was used, according to the operational notes in her file, to cross-reference her contact network. She stood outside her home and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I took an oath, I care for people, and they were using the records I create to care for people to build a case against me for going to meetings." She looked directly at the journalist in front of her. "Against me, a nurse." Derek Hadley, a 73-year-old retired postmaster from Norfolk who organized a local campaign against a post office closure 6 years ago, has a profile that runs to 47 pages. It includes every CCTV record associated with his vehicle from council-operated cameras over an 18-month period, his complete benefit history, and correspondence he sent to his local MP, correspondence that is supposed to be protected by parliamentary convention as a privileged communication between a constituent and their elected representative. It is in his file, all of it. 47 pages about a man who organized a petition because his village was losing its post office. These are the people Operation Hearthstone was built to watch. The resignation that followed Wes Streeting's reading of the leaked documents this morning was not a calculated political maneuver. It was not the product of overnight strategy sessions or carefully drafted position papers. It was the reaction of a man who spent years building a political identity around the idea that the Labour Party stood for the dignity and rights of ordinary working people, and who was confronted this morning with documented evidence that the government he serves has been secretly constructing files on those exact people, using the NHS records he is personally responsible for without telling him, without authorizing him, and without any mechanism by which he could have known. His resignation letter, published at 11:23 a.m. and already being described by political historians as one of the most significant ministerial resignation documents since Robin Cook's statement on Iraq, runs to 6 paragraphs. It does not use careful language, it does not hedge. It states, "I was not informed of Operation Hearthstone. I was not consulted on the use of NHS patient data within its architecture. I was not given the opportunity to refuse. And I would have refused. The National Health Service holds the most intimate details of people's lives in trust, their diagnoses, their treatments, their mental health disclosures, their private conversations with professionals they trusted with things they have told no one else. The idea that this government has been feeding those records into a domestic surveillance machine targeting people who went to meetings and signed petitions is not something I am able to defend, explain, or remain in office alongside. I resign with a clear conscience and a heavy heart, and I will be making a full statement to the Home Affairs Select Committee at the earliest available opportunity." That statement landed in Downing Street like an artillery shell, because Wes Streeting is not a peripheral figure. He is not a junior minister whose departure can be managed with a brief statement and a swift replacement appointment. He is one of the 4 most senior members of the cabinet. He is the public face of the government's most personally felt domestic policy, the NHS. He is the minister whose approval ratings have consistently outperformed the Prime Minister's own. And he has just stood up in public and said that what this government has been doing is indefensible, that he knew nothing about it, and that he will be giving evidence to Parliament. The next 3 ministerial departures came within the following 40 minutes and accelerated the collapse in ways the Downing Street communications operation had no infrastructure to manage. Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook resigned at 11:47 a.m., citing the use of council tax records and local authority data within the Hearthstone architecture, without the knowledge or consent of the local councils that collected it. His statement noted that local government data sovereignty is a principle he had campaigned on for a decade, and that its violation by his own government made his continued participation in that government impossible. Education Minister Bridget Phillipson submitted her resignation letter at 12:08 p.m. without a public statement, a silence that in its own way was more damning than any words, because it indicated someone who had decided that no explanation she could offer would be adequate. Justice Minister Shabana Mahmood, whose entire ministerial brief is built on the premise that the rule of law applies equally to government and citizen alike, resigned at 12:31 p.m. with a statement that contained one sentence of particular legal precision. A government that surveils its citizens outside the boundaries of parliamentary-approved law is not a government operating within the rule of law. It is a government that has decided it is above it. 4 cabinet resignations in 68 minutes. The last time a British government lost 4 cabinet ministers in a single morning was never. It has not happened. There is no precedent. Constitutional historians contacted for comment spent the first part of their responses confirming that fact before attempting any analysis of what it means. What it means in the immediate and operational sense is that the machinery of government has ceased. The Cabinet Office, which coordinates ministerial activity across departments, is operating without functioning leadership in 4 of its most significant policy areas. The Downing Street Communications team, which normally manages the public presentation of a government of 22 cabinet ministers, is now attempting to simultaneously contain 4 active resignation crises, respond to a 217-page document release, manage the parliamentary fallout of an emergency debate application that has been filed by the combined opposition, and locate a prime minister who has reportedly not responded to a call or message from anyone outside his innermost circle since 10:15 this morning. The emergency debate application was filed jointly by the Conservative Party, Reform UK, the Liberal Democrats, and the SNP at 12:45 p.m., the first time in modern parliamentary history that all 4 main opposition parties have jointly filed a procedural application against a sitting government simultaneously. The Speaker granted the application within 14 minutes, scheduling the debate for 3 p.m. The government is required to provide a senior minister to respond. As of the time this broadcast was prepared, Downing Street had not confirmed who that minister would be. In Westminster terms, that uncertainty has a specific meaning. It means no one who was asked said yes. Inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, the WhatsApp architecture that normally functions as an early warning system for backbench discontent has effectively collapsed under the volume of messages being sent across multiple groups simultaneously. A group called simply NHS Data, created this morning specifically in response to the Hearthstone revelations, contains 83 Labour MPs and has received over 300 messages since 11 a.m. The dominant tone is not strategic or political. It is personal. Labour MPs who spent their entire careers knocking on doors telling people the party stood for the NHS, for workers' rights, for civil liberties, are confronting this morning the documented evidence that their government has been using NHS records to surveil the people who hold those values. The messages seen by political journalists describe a psychological as much as a political crisis. One message reads, "I don't recognize what we are anymore." Another reads, "How do I look my members in the face?" A third, from an MP who has represented a northern constituency for 22 years, reads simply, "This is not what I came here to do." Formal leadership challenge letters have been submitted to the Labour Party chair. The confirmed number at the time of broadcast stands at 34. The threshold for a mandatory leadership review is 38. Parliamentary sources with direct knowledge of ongoing discussions place the number expected to submit before the close of the emergency debate at between 41 and 47. The mathematics are no longer ambiguous. They are a countdown. The public response has developed with a speed and geographic spread that reflects how personally this story lands. Operation Hearthstone used NHS records. Every person in Britain has NHS records. Every person who has ever seen a GP, ever visited a hospital, ever spoken to a mental health professional, ever received a prescription, ever confided in a community health worker, every one of those people is now asking the same question. Is my file in there? Was my confidence betrayed? Were the private things I said in a consultation room fed into a government database because I once attended a meeting or signed a petition or spoke to a journalist? That question does not require political alignment to feel. It does not require any particular view on surveillance policy or national security to make your stomach tighten. It requires only the memory of a moment when you told a doctor something you have never told anyone else, something about your health, about your mental state, about your family, about your fears. And then the understanding that the government may have taken that moment and put it in a file about you because you went to a meeting. Outside Parliament, the crowd that gathered through the morning numbered in the thousands by noon and continued to grow through the afternoon. It was not organized, it was not bussed. It arrived because people watched a video or read a message and put their coat on. Among them was Joyce Kavanagh, a 66-year-old retired midwife from Liverpool who spent 34 years delivering babies in the NHS and who discovered her name on the leaked list because she attended 3 meetings of a local campaigning group opposing hospital ward closures in 2022. She stood in the October cold holding a piece of card that read, "I trusted you with MY patients." She said nothing when approached, just held it up. Beside her stood Martin Gregg, a 71-year-old former council worker from Leicester whose profile was constructed from his council tax records, his library borrowing history and 3 letters he sent to his local councillor about planning decisions. He had brought a copy of those letters with him and held them alongside his printed profile entry. "Look at them," he said, "look at what I wrote. I was asking about a planning application, a building, and they built a file on me." He shook his head slowly. "For a building? These are not political warriors, these are not ideologues pursuing an agenda, these are the people the NHS was built for, the people the welfare state was designed to support, the people the Labour Party was created to represent, and those people are standing outside Parliament today because their government surveilled them using the records they generated when they trusted the state with the most private details of their lives." The legal proceedings that have been initiated since 10 a.m. are moving simultaneously on 6 separate tracks and will generate litigation that lawyers estimate will occupy the courts for years. Liberty filed for emergency judicial review of the entire Hearthstone program at 11:15 a.m. The Good Law Project filed a separate challenge targeting the commercial data broker contracts used within the program's architecture. The British Medical Association issued an emergency statement announcing that it was seeking an injunction preventing any further use of NHS patient data within any government surveillance framework and demanding the immediate deletion of all patient data currently held within Operation Hearthstone systems. The Royal College of Nursing issued a parallel statement. The Information Commissioner's Office announced an urgent investigation. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission confirmed it had received sufficient evidence to begin a formal inquiry into whether the targeting criteria used by Hearthstone disproportionately affected individuals from specific ethnic, political, and socio-economic groups in ways that constitute unlawful discrimination. The criminal liability dimension is what is driving the silence inside Number 10 and the paralysis among ministers who have not yet resigned but are now receiving legal advice about their own exposure. The use of NHS data outside the purposes for which it was collected is a criminal offence under the Data Protection Act. The construction of profiles targeting political activity is potentially unlawful under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the Human Rights Act. The use of commercially purchased data in combination with government records to build surveillance files outside any judicial oversight framework may constitute misconduct in public office for every official and minister who authorized and was aware of the program's operation. And the disclosure of patient medical information, even to another government department, even in aggregate form, even without explicit naming, without patient consent is a criminal breach of medical confidentiality with no statutory exception for the purposes described in the Hearthstone documents. Lord Ken MacDonald, the former Director of Public Prosecutions whose legal assessments have become the most watched moments in British political broadcasting this week, appeared at 2:15 p.m. He sat straight in his chair, looked directly at the camera and said, "The criminal exposure here is not theoretical and it is not marginal. The use of NHS patient data in the manner described in these documents is a criminal offence on its face. The question of who knew, who authorized, and who is criminally responsible for that offence is now a matter for the police and the Director of Public Prosecutions. I say that not as a commentator, I say it as someone who held that office and who understands the precise legal threshold those words describe." He paused. "That threshold has been crossed." Nigel Farage addressed a crowd outside Parliament at 1:30 p.m. He did not use notes. He stood still, hands in his coat pockets, and spoke for 9 minutes in the voice of someone who no longer needs to persuade anyone of anything, only to give them language for what they already feel. They built files on people using NHS records. They used what you told your doctor, what your community nurse wrote down, what your mental health worker recorded in confidence. They used the most private things you ever said to anyone and put them in a surveillance database because you attended a meeting, because you signed a piece of paper, because you organized, because you had the audacity to believe that living in a democracy meant you were allowed to disagree. He stopped, looked at the crowd. They were wrong, and now everyone knows they were wrong. The question is what happens to them next. The response from the crowd was something closer to grief than rage. The sound of a country recognizing something about itself it does not like and deciding it will not accept. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch delivered her response to the revelations in the Commons chamber at 3:15 p.m. during the emergency debate, a debate the government had sent its chief secretary to the Treasury to respond to, a choice that itself confirmed the depth of the collapse the original 4 ministers approached having all declined. Badenoch spoke for 14 minutes. She was precise, she was controlled, and she was merciless in the specific way that only precision can be. "This government," she said, "has used the National Health Service, the institution that more than any other embodies the trust British citizens place in their state, as an instrument of political surveillance. It has taken the records of your health, your illness, your mental state, your private disclosures made in confidence to people you trusted, and it has fed them into a machine designed to identify and profile citizens it considered a threat to its interests. Not a threat to national security, a threat to its interests. The distinction is everything." And the fact that the health secretary himself, the minister responsible for those records, knew nothing about this until this morning is either the most catastrophic failure of cabinet government in living memory, or it is the most deliberate and calculated act of concealment by a prime minister against his own colleagues this parliament has ever witnessed. Either answer disqualifies this man from office. The chamber was silent after she sat down. The silence lasted long enough that the chief secretary to the Treasury, who was required to respond on behalf of the government, visibly composed himself before standing. He read a prepared statement that was 14 lines long, acknowledged the seriousness of the concerns raised, confirmed that an internal review had been commissioned, and sat down. He was then asked by 11 separate MPs whether the Prime Minister had personally authorized Operation Hearthstone. He said he was not in a position to confirm or deny the details of specific operational programs. He was asked whether the Prime Minister was aware of its existence. He said he could not speak to the specific state of the Prime Minister's knowledge. He was asked whether the Prime Minister was currently in the building. He paused, and he said he believed the Prime Minister was engaged in urgent consultations. No one in the chamber believed him. And no one in the country watching the live broadcast believed him either. The Prime Minister has been silent for 2 hours and 41 minutes. His last public statement was a social media post at 7:31 this morning about investment in renewable energy. He has not responded to Streeting's resignation. He has not responded to the 3 subsequent resignations. He has not responded to the document release. He has not appeared at the emergency debate. He has not sent a statement to the Speaker. He has not spoken to the journalists outside the black door. He has not posted. He has not broadcast. He has not spoken. And that silence in a democracy is its own answer, because the questions that silence refuses to answer are not complicated. They do not require legal expertise or political analysis to understand. They are the questions anyone asks when they discover they have been watched without their knowledge by someone they trusted with their most private information. Did you know? Did you authorize it? Did you think you had the right? And if you thought you had the right, if you believed that what you told your doctor could be put in a government file because you went to a meeting, then whose country is this? Whose NHS is this? Whose records are these? Whose lives are being governed by whom and in the service of what? Frank Whitmore in Sheffield is holding a document that contains the note a bereavement support worker made when he talked about missing his wife. Sandra Obi in Birmingham is holding a file built from the records she created caring for patients. Derek Hadley in Norfolk has 47 pages about a petition he organized because his village was losing its post office. They are waiting for an answer. 412,000 people are waiting for an answer. And somewhere inside a building on a street called Downing, behind a door the color of midnight, a prime minister who has not spoken for 2 hours and 41 minutes is waiting for something too. The question is whether he is waiting for the courage to speak, or waiting for the right moment to leave.